Have you heard? I've got a new thing. The J. Brown Yoga Weekly Teachers Class. It starts August 2nd, and I'm really excited about it because it's an opportunity for me to interact with many of you around the world in a more personal and face-to-face way. A weekly online teachers class subscription where we can inquire and learn and support teaching. I beta tested it with some of you and was amazed by the depth of the discussions and the ability for us to work together as if we were in the same room despite the obstacle of distance. We've priced it to give the most possible value for the cost, and we're kicking it off with an introductory rate. The J. Brown Yoga Weekly Teachers Class. It starts August 2nd. You can reserve a spot at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, looks like I've hit record and you've hit play, and here we are. This is J. Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is J. Brown. Welcome to you if you are new, and thanks to any returning friends or foes. I guess there's people who listen to this who aren't friends, but if you're returning, I'm just going to assume you're a friend. And I appreciate that you have decided to be here with me. How are you? Are you doing okay? Hope this is finding you in a favorable moment. I am actually coming to you under a bit of a strain. You see, normally I would be recording this on the day that I will be leaving for Montana. So it's a day or two earlier than it would normally be, and tomorrow is a very short day, and then we have to wake up really early in the morning to get to the airport because the only flight that would work is like a really early morning flight, which normally would not be a problem if I wasn't bringing an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old with me. It was just me and my wife. It would be okay. We could get up early. We could get there. It would be fine. But when you throw an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old into that mix of having to get up like super early, like 4 in the morning or whatever, I haven't even figured it out yet, and trying to get to the airport on time, that starts to feel a little stressful. I'm sure those of you with children know what I speak of. And so I'm trying to get ahead of the game, and I'm recording this earlier than I normally would, but I already am sort of feeling the strain of like, oh my God, am I going to get everything done? I am excited to go to Montana, to the Feathered Pipe Ranch. That's why I'm bringing them, because it's this really special place, and I think it'll make some special memories for us. And we decided to make a bit of a family trip after it, so for the week after my program at the Feathered Pipe, we're going to get in a car and do a road trip. Brown family road trip. We're going to drive through Idaho and see some friends and family, and then land at my sister's in Vancouver, Washington. Haven't seen her in a long time. I'm looking forward to that. And it's going to be quite an adventure. We've never done this before. Audrey, my wife, and I have never even really tried to take the girls anywhere far or do any big family trips because they've always been so young, and you know, when they're really young, they're so unpredictable, and you don't want to put yourself in a precarious situation. And this is the first time we've decided we think they're old enough, and I personally just started to feel like I want to make sure to give them some good childhood memories of, I don't know, us on an adventure. So, in any case, that's what's up with me. Also, we've got an amazing podcast today with Benjamin Lorr, author of Hellbent. I did not know Benjamin at all. I just reached out to him, and he is a really cool guy. I enjoyed this conversation with him immensely, and I found it very enlightening. It's a good precursor to next week. We're going to listen to a talk I had with Jerome Armstrong, who wrote a book called Calcutta Yoga, which goes more in depth into like the origins of Bikram yoga, but this was really just me kind of connecting with Benjamin some as a writer, and also, inquiring some about things I was curious about with his book and just with Bikram and just larger societal issues that we're facing. So we're going to get into that today with Benjamin Lorr. Before we do, let me mention that this episode of Yoga Talks is sponsored by yogalifestyle.com. For 10 years, I owned a yoga center, and this is where I got my yoga-related supplies, mats and blocks and bolsters, whatever you might need to help support your practice and study of yoga. Ray Greenberg, he's the owner of Yoga Lifestyle. He's been on the podcast before, and I just really appreciate the fact that it's independently owned. You deal directly with Ray, who's a yogi himself, and he's got some unique items. He's got the Becca Long Life mats, which were the ones that I stocked my studio with because, in my opinion, they're like the best mats. He's also got this wedge bolster, this teardrop bolster he sent me that I've been lying on, I've been enjoying. He's got some pretty cool stuff, and he's a pretty cool guy. So I encourage you to check it out. Go to yogalifestyle.com. This episode is also sponsored by KarmaSoft. You're familiar with KarmaSoft because it's our longest standing sponsor. It's a complete online yoga studio management solution. This is what I used when I had my yoga center as well. This is the software I use to manage my center. If you're someone who is a yoga, Pilates, or fitness center owner, manager, or teacher, and you have to do the work of scheduling and class payments and accounting, you can make all of it easier and more efficient by using KarmaSoft. I have been saying this since long before they became a sponsor. You can go back and listen to episode 84 from October 2017, featuring KarmaSoft's owner, Rudy Senecal, and you can hear all about the company yourself. I highly recommend KarmaSoft. Check it out at karmasoftonline.com. All right, what else? Oh, let me express a little gratitude and appreciation to all of you who have been reaching out to me via email and through common threads about my new studio in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Seems like there's a lot of you out there who are really feeling a little bit down on the conventional models that are happening at many of the yoga centers out there, and you're interested in how yoga teachers can create opportunities to teach and get paid for that feel more fair and mutual. And that's what I've been trying to do at the new studio. And I just appreciate the support. It's going to be something I'm talking a lot about going forward. In fact, this week I have a blog post out, comes out the same day as this. It's called Shell Games Keep the Myth Alive. And it's just me trying to work through some of this stuff, trying to figure out what a good way to think about how I offer what I do is, and how to get the money that I need and still have it really be about the teaching and not about selling classes. So, in any case, I just really appreciate that there's a lot of you out there who are thinking about a lot of the same things. Please keep your emails coming. We will sort it out together. Also, shout out, a bunch of new live stream subscribers have been around, and that's been fun for me, especially when people log in live and I know you're there. I feel like I've been able to really have some interaction, and just the studio has really been great for the live stream, and I'm glad so many of you are jumping on. So cheers to all of you guys. Let me also quick mention, I've got a couple of travel gigs coming up this month. August 4th in Carlisle, Pennsylvania at Anahata Yoga. August 10th through 12th in Falls Church, Virginia at the Yogi Underground. August 26th in Rye, New York at Wainwright House. You can find out about those gigs and more. And all of my video stuff, the subscriptions, and my practice video and online workshop. You can read the blog that I was talking about just now. You can listen to the archives of this podcast. All of my stuff can be found at jbrownyoga.com. All right, my friends, I will touch base with you on the other side, talk a little bit more about what's coming up. But for now, let's go ahead and get to this talk that I had with Benjamin Lorr. Hello?
Hey, how you doing?
Good, man. Is this Benjamin Lorr?
It is I. Yes.
Very cool.
How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks, man. It's cool to get to talk to you. I appreciate you giving me a little bit of time. Are you in Brooklyn right now?
I'm in Brooklyn in a little office, hunkered down. Got some coffee.
What part of Brooklyn?
Carroll Gardens. It used to be an old Italian neighborhood. Now it's a formerly old Italian neighborhood covered with strollers and up and coming moms and dads.
Oh well, I know it well. I know it well because I lived in Brooklyn for 15 years. I had a yoga center in Williamsburg. Nice. For 10 years. I sold it a year ago and moved my family to Pennsylvania.
Whereabouts in Pennsylvania?
I live in Easton, Pennsylvania now.
God.
And, just for you to have like a sense of like why I reached out to talk to you more. I know we had like a little bit email exchange, but not a lot. I'm a writer as well, and I'm working on something, and I've been looking to your book in one very specific regard. One of the things that I think you did so well in your book, which I remember, it was written in 2012, is that right?
Yeah, or that's when it came out. It was probably written 2010, 11.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the thing that I really want to compliment you on about your book and what I've been sort of like hoping to take inspiration from is the way that it didn't fall into the trap that I think sometimes books fall into when they write about yoga. Like, it didn't feel like a full memoir. Like, it felt like it told a bigger story. And even though it was about you and it was your story also, and that's sort of the thing I'm trying to capture. And for me, I came into yoga, I don't know, it was in my early 20s. It was like 1993, 94 maybe. And, I then had this center, and then now I'm like in my 40s with 2 kids.
Right.
And I'm just kind of like trying to sort out like my coming into my adulthood sort of like is interwoven with like yoga going from underground to mainstream.
Right.
And, you were
just there to witness it all, this whole transformation.
Well, I kind of rode the wave. I wasn't like a big celeb teacher or anything.
No, you were standing on the sidelines.
I rode the wave, and I managed to like do my thing all these years somehow. I don't even know how. That's what I'm sort of trying to figure out, I think. And, I started this podcast like 3 years ago, and it sort of began this process for me of like trying to like sort out how we got here, how I got here, how we got here. Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting. I've had a lot of conversations with like, I think 120 something now. And I've never spoken to anybody who was like a Bikram yoga person or whatever. Like, everybody's taken a couple of Bikram classes. Like, I took a couple Bikram classes, but nobody who was ever like really in it. And certainly nobody who's ever competed.
Yeah, it's definitely the gateway drug for a lot of yogis. It opens a door. Although I wouldn't qualify myself as a Bikram yoga person.
I know. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. Right, I know you were writing a book while you were there. Like,
right.
It just changes it some. But what I think, reason why I want to talk to you, it's kind of great for me that you're a little bit like, you even said you feel like you're a little bit out of the loop. Some. I think that's better for me.
Okay.
Because for me, Bikram, I never really know where to put him. Like, I taught teacher trainings, and part of the teacher trainings that I do have a lot to do with providing what I think of as a more comprehensive overview of like the history and philosophy and like what are all the different schools and systems and styles and what are the influences that teachers had, And like I have this chart I made, and at the top of the chart is a box that has like the earliest carvings that Georg Forstein says date back to Stone Age times in pyramid texts.
Right.
And then it flow charts down, and like 2/3 of the way down, you've got BKS Iyengar and Patabi Joyce and TKV Desikachar. And then you've got like a generation or two, and then me. Like it was just like to get to me, But every time I taught the training, almost someone would ask me, "Where's Bikram on the chart?" And I never know where to put him. Like to me, I didn't know where he was, and I just remember like a picture of him sitting on the hood of a Rolls Royce and being like, "Who the fuck is this guy?" Like I had already studied these other schools before I got exposed to him, but. Getting to the point I want to get to is that there has been like more recent stories about him. I don't know if you're aware of that like recent ESPN podcast series that came out. Did you hear about that?
Sure. I just did an event with them 2 nights ago.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So like there's been more.
Well, I haven't listened to it.
What's that? You didn't listen to it at all?
No.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm very aware of it, and they seem like great people. And actually, Julia Henderson, who did the podcast, I feel like waited a long time for someone that I trust to tell that story right, and she seems like someone who's definitely going to do that.
Yeah, well, it also seems like things have changed a lot since you wrote your book.
Well, hopefully.
I mean, just in terms of like culturally, Me Too movement and all, not just within the Bikram community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I wrote that book, I called him a narcissist, predator, manipulative, and talk about him trying to sleep with students. And nobody, in none of the reviews is that mentioned. What I thought when I was writing it, like, oh, this is the lead story out of this book. Forget somebody's yoga journey and they're losing a little weight. Like prominent American yogi is sleeping with students. And at that time, New York Times didn't even mention it. None of the reviews mention it. And so it was just, I don't think that would be the case today. It's just we're in a different place with those types of stories and comfort.
I think you're right. And, also I know that I've been talking to this other guy who wrote a book. Some of the information from his research was used in that ESPN thing. His name is Jerome Armstrong. He wrote this book, Calcutta Yoga, and it's about Buddha Bose and Vishnu Ghosh. And I just never even heard of these folks. It's like a part of the history that's out of my frame, that's been out of my frame.
Yeah. I mean, you've read like or heard of David Gordon White and Mark Singleton. And so, it's like that typical image of yoga that's kind of handed down in one solid stream from, way back when in the Himalayas, guru to guru in this bucket brigade is not at all an accurate representation of what you find when you go and look at how yoga is represented over time in India, and it's used in all different senses and contexts, far afield from like modern asana practice, which of course we now all know has like pretty shallow roots. From everything from spell casting to money lending. All of these are associated with the mercenaries. They're all associated with the yoga tradition in various ways. And so Bikram, he represents this, I think, there's no other word to call it but authentic, since when nothing is really authentic, when you're coming from this giant stew of practices that get packaged under a single word and a single label, and especially packaged in that way for export to Americans, as intellectual export, he becomes hard to place. But I think he comes from a very, illustrious yoga lineage. His guru Vishnu Charan Ghosh was Paramahansa Yogananda's younger brother, and they were kind of a prominent spiritual family in Calcutta around the turn of the century. And Vishnu Ghosh was more than just a yogi. Of course, he has this older brother who's fantastically renowned yogi and has influenced many people. But his gateway into the spiritual yoga world was largely through weightlifting. and through physical culture. And I think Jerome's book does a great job of getting into the nuts and bolts of that.
Yeah, I'm hoping to bring him on, and we'll tell that story more. But to me, I think it's interesting. It's something that I've heard you talk about even in some of the interviews from years ago when your book came out, this idea about authenticity and what makes something authentic. And it is a relative term. Like, you could be authentically abusive, or like you can be authentic about what you're doing, even if it's not a great thing. But I do also appreciate how.
Well, also just in terms of
go ahead, please.
How big tent yoga is. It's this huge collection of practices. In the book I use the analogy of crafting. It's like you would never refer someone who makes crafts. Like, you're not going to get in an argument whether or not basket weaving is more of an authentic craft than macrame, just because macrame involves plastic strands and is a product of the 1950s, and basket weaving is some ancient tradition. I mean, crafting, we intuitively understand it's this huge. There's lots of different things that fall under the rubric of craft, and we're very tolerant of letting things in. With yoga, especially in the West, there isn't that tolerance for the vastness of this system. In our minds, a lot of people have defined it in very narrow, rigid terms that it has to conform to it, which I think will probably bear on to some of where this conversation goes.
I think that's right. I think that's totally right, because part of the reason that is we were, I don't know, I remember when I first came into the things that we were taught and what was just a given in like almost any yoga class, a lot of it has come into question. You cited Mark Singleton's book, and some of like the myth stories of where this stuff comes from didn't end up being entirely true. And a lot of it is like stuff that got made up along the way, or padded, or however, our human beings remember things. And ultimately, a lot of that has been changing. I really have seen these really big shifts going on across like the yoga world. But I'm curious to get a little bit to where, like, when did you start going to yoga? It was in New York City?
Yeah, it was in New York City. I mean, I had probably a typical Bikram introduction in that I had no idea what Bikram was. I just hurt myself. I had put on some weight, and I was like, I'm going to do something non-threatening, taxing, but heretofore I'd been a big bicyclist. I'd done a lot of running. I played soccer. But I just to put on a little too many pounds that I felt like I didn't want to get a stress fracture if I went back to running. So I thought I'd go to a yoga studio, and the closest yoga studio to me happened to be a Bikram studio. Of course, that meant nothing to me. And I walked in and I took class, and it was a powerful experience for sure. And this was way before I conceived of a book. And, the first Bikram class, especially if you walk in completely unaware, the heat, it's up to like 108 degrees and it's choking humidity. And you're kind of thinking to yourself, what in the world have I gotten into? There's people around you who are like clearly the intense, obsessive practitioners, and they're like string bean bikini briefs and, tightly corded bodies. And here I am, like,
all looking at themselves in front of the mirror, right?
Yeah, staring with their beady eyes, like right back at themselves with this like smug smile because they know they're doing something good for themselves. And you're this outsider walking into this totally skeptical, but by the end of the class, there's this enormous rush that you get, and whether it's an endorphin rush or it's a whole big cocktail of things that's going on, and you're kind of just basking in the feeling of completion, and it is quite exerting, and you do feel like you get a good workout, and there's a lot of tranquility and repose and ability to step outside of yourself that comes in that class when you're being guided through a meditation and a physical meditation by the teacher, which of course is very Bikram. There's the teacher's just reciting this class in front of you.
Yeah, my experience was that it kind of picks you up and takes you on a ride.
Yeah, exactly.
And hopefully, if the teacher's very skilled, it can deposit you in an okay place after. But I remember asking too many questions. The teacher didn't seem. I remember I was like a big question asker, and then that wasn't like it wasn't much about like an interaction between the teacher and student asking a bunch of questions. You're just supposed to be on for the ride.
Yes, exactly. Let the lap bar go down and shut up and take your yoga,
Yeah.
which I think for someone like me who walked in there a total novice, it's like I'm the perfect vehicle. For someone like you're walking in, you have a lot of experience. It's probably extremely frustrating, and you're like, wait a second.
Over the years, I've gotten more and more accepting because I've known people who've used that 26 poses and 2 breathing exercises to a lot of benefit for themselves. And I don't know, I'm of the opinion, I don't believe like the forms are inherently injurious ever.
Oh, no.
I think like you could do those 26 poses in a way without hurting yourself. But a lot of people do them in a way that I do think is kind of injurious.
Well, there's definitely exhortations to push, and anytime you're pushing your body towards new places, you get into pretty risky behavior pretty quickly.
I mean, I remember hearing some pretty like hardcore boot camp-esque intros to the class where it was like, you might throw up and it's gonna hurt, and like that was all encouraged.
Which of course is just, it's this bonding of community under adversity, and like, oh, we're all in the trenches of this yoga that's tougher and stronger and more intense than the average yoga. So that kind of creates this tribe mentality, which is very Bikram too.
So how present was Bikram in the classes that you're going to? Because you were in LA practicing with him. How present was he? Was there a big picture of him? Because isn't there the rules? You have to have a big picture of him and stuff?
So I don't think I knew who he was for the first year, I would say. And I developed a pretty aggressive practice. I got out of that first class. I was like, wow, that was life-changing. Like there's this, they say you get hit by a bus, but it's like a bus full of flowers. So it's like you're just knocked on your butt, and all these flowers.
I mean, flowers don't hurt like that, but I know what you mean.
Right. It's this combination, that juxtaposition of feeling tranquil and also feeling like you just got knocked on your ass. And so I developed this practice. I don't think I knew who he was for a while. And then I actually, pretty much about the time I found out he was is when I decided I wanted to write a book on it, because I just thought it was pretty weird. I remember there was a teacher, not a teacher, a kind of senior student an older gentleman, was one of these like very inspirational guys. He was in his 80s. He had great practice, super healthy. And I was like, I want to be like that guy when I'm his age. I want to have that type of intensity and just care for my body. And he went off to teacher training just to do it. And he came back with these stories that all the boys were asked to leave the room and all the girls were asked to massage Bikram. And that was, I remember that story in particular. I was like, huh? Like,
when he was telling that story, was he telling it like he was shocked, or like?
He was telling it, no, just like it was matter of fact. He was talking to other teachers who knew the deal, and there was nothing shocking about it at all. Of course, for me, overhearing it, I was like, well, there's something here. And then I remember going on kind of a binge, researching all this stuff. And
I guess we should mention, I mean, you, at that time, were you like still teaching high school science and sex education?
Yeah. I was a high school science teacher, sex educator.
See, because that's really interesting. I mean,
I do think, I don't actually make that connection explicitly ever. But so I was teaching at-risk youth, 17 to 21-year-olds in Bushwick, and I had heard a lot of stories of sexual abuse from my students. It was a under-resourced school. We didn't have as many social workers and guidance counselors, and there was a very personal relationship between students and staff. It was a beautiful place to work, but I had heard a lot of things like that. I think it probably did prime me in a place to, those tentacles of awareness go up and you're like, something's not right here. And that certainly was the case when talking with actual women when I went to training, and we're interviewing people, and people would be various degrees of forthcoming. But I think that experience definitely informed the book and
Okay, was this person, this person you were looking to who came back telling the stories, was this the person who had the stroke? I read
No. That was a teacher who was the studio owner, in fact, and another teacher who I admired quite a bit, and that was another moment that in the book serves as kind of the narrative moment. You know, in real life and in the book, everything that happened in the book is 100% true, but of course, real life doesn't follow the narrative thread quite so perfectly. So
I'm learning that right now. Like, how you put it down, you got to be clear, or you got to be true to it, I guess.
You gotta honor the truth, and yet you have to, you know, it helps to have moments of clarity where it helps to have certain turning points. And reality is, like, there was a lot of, I had all these doubts coming down at once. It wasn't like this guy had a stroke and I had a stroke of insight.
That was the one thing that did. I know, but story-wise, it was a significant moment, it seems like.
Oh, and it was a significant moment. You know, here was this teacher who I thought was this paragon of health, and he loved the yoga more than anyone. You know, he was true extoller of its benefits, and he believed in Bikram. He would fly out to teacher trainings to teach for free. He was in. He had drunk the Kool-Aid, and I don't think that's true anymore. And then he had this stroke, and in retrospect, a lot of this is naivety. It was just showed how much I bought into the system, that I believed that there would be a yoga that would protect you from a stroke, which is, frankly, a crazy idea on my part. But it was, along with all these other things, it served as an alarm bell that what I was being told wasn't exactly right. And of course, there's no yoga that's going to protect you from a stroke. And if someone's advertising something like that and teaching you that their system is the one system that is this protective system, I mean,
there's a lot of
start going off.
I mean, no, there's a lot we can get to about sort of like the kind of the difference between like what happens when someone's practicing, and then sometimes like cult-like things that happen around that in the community.
Yeah,
because it seems interesting to me, like that in your book, you're very clear about like how you really also benefited and have still to this day great appreciation for like that practice that you did.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not to separate, you know, I think, well, one of the ways I've come to appreciate the experience is really as one that is filled with dichotomies, and some of them feel irresolvable to me. You know, I'm unwilling to give Bikram a pass for any of his behavior. He's clearly someone who is a true predator and has done terrible things to people. And yet a lot of the reasons he's done these things is because he, you know, maniacally held to these standards, and a lot of the traits that fueled the really terrible parts of him were also traits that fueled his desire to spread this practice and made him successful at spreading this practice and made him an excellent teacher of this practice. And I also refuse to ignore, you know, I've heard so many stories of people whose lives have been changed by Bikram yoga, that to ignore those stories is folly as well. I mean, that it's really would be quite patronizing and paternalistic to tell people who've telling you that their lives have been changed, that they haven't been changed. And frankly, those two dynamics feed each other. When you get these people who feel like their lives have been changed and touched, and this yoga has given them something they never could have before, and that opens them up to a level of vulnerability, a level of, you know, belief in this, in the system as a unique thing that must be protected and honored in a way that then becomes quite dangerous itself. So the kind of juxtaposition of opposites is really right at the core.
I think that's right. And I think it's the same sort of dichotomy and juxtaposition that, as I said, it's happening in the broader field. We've been talking about the Ashtanga yoga community a lot on this podcast of late. And it's a similar thing. We have all these people who've been doing Ashtanga practice for their whole lives, or not whole life, but adult lives, and it's like this deeply personal and beneficial thing to them. And then it's revealed that the guru at the head of that school abused people sexually, and then what to make of that, And,
that sounds very parallel to the Bikram world, right?
Yeah, and it's the same kind of conversation that people are trying to have to sort of sort out. Well, there's that question of, can you separate the teacher from the teachings, and it is an interesting thing if you still have the name Bikram up on the front window of your yoga studio. It's a little weird. It's a little weird to have a rapist picture up on the wall as though we're venerating him.
Yeah, I think I would question the choice of anyone who did that.
But I still think there are. I mean, it's global. And he's still out on the lam, which is the crazy thing about that.
Yeah, he's still out on the lam. He won't come to America until he pays whatever fines he's due. And yeah, it's so hard to separate this from. I think that's crazy, first of all. Obviously, if you're trying to run an inclusive yoga studio, you don't put a rapist picture and name on the front of your studio, especially even if you just don't do that at all. But if there's 1% chance that people would know that who are coming to your studio. But I think to understand the community, you have to understand how invested these people have become. And I say these people, these studio owners who have put their livelihoods and they are convinced that the Bikram brand is a big part of that. To them, it's terrifying to think about changing the name when what's the alternative? And there's also a terror that Bikram yoga is distinct from hot yoga, and they don't want to just be blended in to this great American homogenizer of yoga systems, when there's been a lot of hard work to make that system unique, and for better or worse. I mean, you can argue all day, but it's a unique experience, and it's been rigidly controlled up to this point. And as soon as you take that Bikram name down, it all goes to chaos. Suddenly, there's no quality control, there's no standards, and I don't have a single problem with that. As a non-invested person, you do your homework, you go into your local studio, and you find out whether it's a good one. But I think if you're on the studio owner side of that, that's a big, terrifying jump.
And I think it's a good point. I think pretty much all hot yoga is hybrided off of Bikram, though.
Yes.
Which is interesting, because that is totally global. Some people know hot yoga and they don't know Bikram.
Right.
But
right.
I hear you. I agree. I don't think, again, I don't know, I wouldn't want to take anything away from anybody, but at the same time, things are changing. And, I think the issue for me is what we've talked about before is it seems like if your yoga or your livelihood is connected to a person outside of yourself, outside of your own experience of practice, you're in a tough bind if that person doesn't end up being a person you can stand by.
Yeah.
And other people who practice those same practices for years and years, they don't connect their yoga to that person. And so they're able to, even if they find out that person isn't everything they might have thought he was, to still have a relationship to yoga that's not contingent on that person.
Yes. I think that's exactly right. And it's interesting. I mean, I wonder how the Ashtanga community would react if Ashtanga referred to a person as opposed to a system. In many ways, you guys get to duck that whole conversation.
Well, they're trying to. I mean, we'll see. I think a lot of people would like an official statement that comes from the new torch holder, but there hasn't been any. So I think a lot of it's getting worked out just among individuals in the grassroots communities. Even if it's not happening from the top, but I know there's other people still kind of pushing, because on some level, I think it's an important conversation, because to me personally, my viewpoint of yoga, which I've heard you express also, is that it is this innate thing. And the more people aren't looking to external authorities, in my opinion, the better.
I mean, I certainly hold to that. I mean, I guess external authorities play a really interesting role in the yoga experience, and I don't know. It is certainly an innate thing, but key to this whole dynamic is that we have standard bearers. We have people who are, and particularly in the Bikram world, you have people who are looking to use yoga to transform themselves. So it's hard to make it a completely innate thing. If you're looking to transform yourself or you're looking to change yourself because you walk into this practice, then you're automatically looking for someone else to help you to make that transformation. You're asking to stretch yourself beyond where you currently are. And that's not something that people can do by themselves. It's like the very nature of stretching beyond yourself requires somebody or something to act as a standard for this ideal that you can't quite conceive. Otherwise, if you could conceive it, you'd probably be there already.
Well, I appreciate that a lot. I don't know that I like the word standard so much, but I hear what you're saying, though. No, I hear what you're saying. Like, to me, that is a fundamental difference in the practice I do now from practice I did earlier time in my life, is that if you are trying to get somewhere as though you're not already there, if you are trying to become something as though you are not already it, then absolutely, what you're saying is absolutely true. You need somebody who can take you to places you don't feel you can get to on your own.
Right. And that sets up its entire...
Yeah, that sets an entire dynamic in practice.
Exactly.
And then you better hope the teacher's going to take you somewhere good.
Right. Well, you're trusting this person.
And sometimes they will, but I don't know that they're standard bearers. I don't like that word because I think sometimes you have less or more skillful teachers, and sometimes you could put yourself in the hands of a teacher and they really do right by you. Sometimes you put yourself in the hands of a teacher and they don't do so right by you. And sometimes people put themselves in the hands of a teacher they never even met in a way, which is a little weird.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Because because you said Bikram was a tightly controlled thing. More so, I remember years ago having the debate when he tried to copyright it.
Right.
And I was like, can he copyright his sequences? And I actually defended him some because I always felt, to your point about authenticity, he never really seemed to be claiming he was anything else than what he was. He always claimed he was a megalomaniac asshole. You know what I mean? He was always seemed to me really obvious.
Yeah.
And, it never spoke to me, and I kind of just disregarded him. But I sort of appreciated that. I was like, yeah, he created a thing. It has a set system. It has a set script. That's like kind of an intellectual property thing. I don't think you can copyright yoga, but in a way, you could copyright that, I suppose. It seemed kind of silly to me, and it seemed contrary to like my ideas about yoga. But ultimately, I think, I don't know. I guess the other part of it that I got sidetracked, where I wanted to go with you a little bit, was the idea about yoga competitions, because I have always been a little bit curious about that. I remember I did travel to India in 1998, and I would drop in or try to study with teachers along the way. And I met this one guy, and he was like, you should compete. And he was trying to get me to compete. And I know there's like a history of competition yoga in India. And I believe, Bikram was a competition yoga. At least the stories I know of him is that he was this competition yogi weightlifter and he got injured. And then this is the yoga that he created out of that or whatever. And I'm sort of curious because you competed. And
sure.
I'm wondering, I've heard you talk about competition in positive ways, where like you got something good out of competition, and I really appreciate it. But what I'm wondering is, is there a criteria? Like, how does someone judge your routine? Like, what is your routine judged on? Are there clear categories that it's based on?
Yeah. So first, I would never, ever, ever, ever have competed if it weren't for the book.
That's right. I remember you saying that. Like, you got the 100%. Book deal, and you like, okay, this is worth spending $11,000 on.
Yeah, I would never have gone to teacher training without the book. Yeah, absolutely. So you have to. That's one in asterisks for all the competitors out there who do this from the heart, and so my experience will not completely overlie with theirs. However, I can definitely talk about the nuts and bolts of that, and I can definitely ascribe. Yeah, I certainly had positive things coming out of my yoga competition experience. In many ways, it was just an excuse to deepen a practice.
Had you been competitive, like in other sports and stuff?
I played a lot of soccer growing up, And
that's pretty team sporty. That's not you up on the stage
Yeah,
all by yourself in nothing but underwear.
I know. And it's an intense, yoga, your yoga practice is a very personal thing, I think. And that's true even in the Bikram world. And then to put it on display in the way of a yoga competition is a enormous, it's a weight. And in that act of sharing something so personal, there are some positives there too. Again, it's one of these things that really walks that razor's edge. It can go sideways on you quick, and you get people who are just into the competition aspect and come off stage and burst into tears and I feel like they.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.